Good morning and welcome to the Getty Center. I'm really sorry about the weather. We'll try to do better next time. I'm Steve Olson. As you just heard, I'm the CFO and Chief Operating Officer of the J. Paul Getty Trust. And we are delighted that the Sustainability Summit is back for its 13th year at the Getty Center. Let me give you a quick introduction about us. The J. Paul Getty Trust is the world's largest organization devoted to the visual arts. It consists of 4 programs: the J. Paul Getty Museum, the Conservation Institute, the Getty Research Institute, and the Getty Foundation. Now, I am confident that no other speaker today will talk about art, so please forgive me if I spend 3 minutes doing just that. And this isn't off topic. In the same way that you and your organizations seek to promote environmental and economic sustainability through business operations and policymaking, the Getty works to ensure the sustainability of our common cultural heritage. We do that through research, conservation, publications, exhibits, grant initiatives, and training programs. Our work takes place in laboratories, in the field, in art galleries, conservation studios, and libraries. Consider our work at King Tut's tomb in Egypt. Discovered in 1922, the tomb has attracted tourists for nearly 90 years. Unfortunately, every person who entered the tomb brought with them humidity, dust, and carbon dioxide, which threatened the wall paintings and made the tomb unpleasant to visit. For 10 years, the Getty Conservation Institute worked with Egyptian authorities to develop and implement site conservation and management plans for the tomb. We installed a new viewing platform, lighting, and signage so visitors could better see the tomb and understand its cultural significance, while new barriers keep the paintings safe. A new filtration and ventilation system pulls dust and carbon dioxide out, pushes filtered air in, and reduces humidity. Created more than 3,000 years ago, the tomb is now posed to last well into the future. Similarly, you may have heard about the brazen theft and recovery of Woman in Ochre, a 1955 painting by Wilhelm de Kooning. This painting was on view at the University of Arizona's Museum of Art in 1985. 2 thieves distracted a security guard, cut the painting from its frame, ripped the canvas off its backing, and rolled it up to hide it under a raincoat. The theft took only a few minutes, and the painting remained missing for more than 30 years. It was recovered in 2017 when it turned up in the shop of an antiques dealer. However, the painting is badly damaged, as you can imagine. Through an agreement with the University of Arizona, conservators at the Getty Museum and scientists at the Getty Conservation Institute will work together to study, repair, clean, conserve, and document the painting. This work will include reuniting it with its original frame and repairing and restoring remnants of the canvas that were left behind after the theft. The project will also be a teaching tool, providing access and information to graduate-level conservation and science students at local universities. Conserving works of art is intrinsically important for all of us because art is an essential part of our common cultural heritage. But cultural heritage also has important economic impacts. Tourism is crucial to Egypt's economy, for example, and ancient cultural heritage is a significant driver of that tourism. The recovery of the de Kooning painting will increase visitation and hopefully donations to the University of Arizona's Art Museum. Closer to home, we've demonstrated the value of art and culture through our analysis of the economic impact of Pacific Standard Time, LALA, a Getty-led collaboration involving 70 cultural institutions from Santa Barbara to San Diego, which explored Latin American and Latino art. A recent study showed that nearly 2.8 million people participated in Pacific Standard Time events, generating more than $430 million in economic output and supporting more than 4,000 jobs. So art is good for the soul, but also for the bottom line. As you develop strategies for a sustainable future, the Getty stands ready to play a part by ensuring that our cultural heritage thrives as well as the economy and the environment. Thank you, and please enjoy your day.
Please now welcome to the stage LABC Institute Chairman Brad Cox.
Good morning, good morning. Please join me in thanking Steve and the Getty Center for graciously hosting this year's LABC Sustainability Summit. You know, the Getty Center really does share our values with a mission deeply rooted in sustainability. The Los Angeles Business Council convenes this annual Sustainability Summit, now in its 13th year, to develop policies that advance sustainability and economic development in our region. Every year, we look forward to the outstanding and important event, and we thank the Getty for allowing us to share this phenomenal space. We are incredibly grateful for their continued partnership. Before we proceed on today's summit, I'd like to acknowledge some of the people and organizations that have worked so hard to put this event together. I'd like to thank our summit co-chairs, 8 Minute Energy, Bank of America, the California Community Foundation, 5 Point Holdings, LLC, the Gilbert Foundation, J.P. Morgan Chase & Company, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, Southern California Edison, and Walmart. And especially acknowledge our event hosts, GAF Energy, PCS Energy, and United Airlines, as well as our committee-level sponsors who are listed in your program guide. Without your continued support, today's event really would not be possible, so a big thank you to each and every one of you. I'd also like to acknowledge the over 75 cooperating organizations with us today and for your help in promoting the summit. Please find that list of cooperating organizations in your program guide. I'd also like to thank the numerous distinguished guests in attendance representing local and state elected offices, departments, and commissions, especially those who are not appearing up on stage. I'd also like to give a quick shout out to our outstanding honorees from our VIP reception last week. We were proud to present the LABC Sustainable Leadership Award to Deborah Flint, who's done a phenomenal job as CEO of LAWA, for her commitment to reducing GHG emissions, water usage, and energy storage at all of the LAWA airports. We awarded the LABC Business Leadership Award to Kilroy Realty for their commitment to transitioning their entire office building portfolio to be carbon neutral by 2020. It was a wonderful event last week, and we are pleased that so many of you are able to join us today, then, as well as last week. 2018 and 2019 have been historic years for California and Los Angeles, with lots of positive outcomes, but we also have some big challenges ahead. Unfortunately, as we all know, we're living in an environment with many challenging weather conditions and natural disasters. Our state and region have experienced way too many tragic wildfires, mudslides, and floods, which will only increase if we fail to take immediate action on climate change. We look forward to hearing our first panel, which will focus on how we can mitigate and adapt to the climate change challenge by investing in the digital grid of the future, which will be powered by distributed energy resources like solar, battery storage, and microgrids. The future, however, is not all grim. Our state and local leaders are in action in developing cutting-edge policy strategies to address our climate challenge. Last year, California cemented the push towards 100% clean energy with SB 100, a successful policy effort which can be attributed to the work of many people in this room. A lot of heavy lifting. Everybody, give yourselves a round of applause. It was a great accomplishment. In February, Mayor Garcetti announced that Los Angeles would not repower 3 gas-powered plants that provided 40% of the city's natural gas portfolio. Instead, he outlined a future that's going to be focused on delivering robust programs for local solar and battery storage. Now that our city has established these goals, we need to develop the strategic plan for implementation. We're excited to hear the mayor today, who is going to share his thoughts on how we are going to achieve those goals. On our second panel with CPUC President Michael Picker and CEC Commissioner Andrew McAllister, they're going to outline a 100% renewable future that is both equitable and economically vibrant. As you will hear, the clean energy future requires a heavy investment from our private sector to complement the public sector investments. Our spotlight sessions, sponsored by 5 Point, will feature two titans in the business industry, Walmart and JP Morgan, highlighting their commitment to investing in infrastructure and technologies that will drive emission reductions, economic development, and create many well-paying jobs. You must stay to the end because in closing up the program, we're going to talk about the challenges that we face to conserve and recycle water. As you know, we had a wonderful year of rain, but we still have our challenges ahead. We are thrilled to be joined by California's newly confirmed Secretary of the Natural Resources Agency, Wade Crowfoot, who will share California's vision to provide safe drinking water for all its residents and how we will uphold standards that the federal government has attempted to repeal. Wade will be followed by a panel of experts who will address the investments required in our water system to ensure stable, clean, and affordable water resources for our residents and our businesses. Before we kick off the summit today, we have two very quick but important announcements that I think most of you saw this week. First, after a decade of partnership between LADWP and LABC, we are proud to announce that the pilot 150-megawatt feed-in tariff solar rooftop program, the nation's largest in-basin program, has reached capacity. Put your hands together. That's a phenomenal accomplishment. This morning, LABC sent a letter to the board leadership of LADWP urging the department to create a permanent, expanded program that will continue to drive investment, create local jobs, and clean our air in Los Angeles. We look forward to working with our partners at LADWP and the City of Los Angeles on a successful expansion of this important solar feed-in tariff program. Second, a lot of hard work went into this. I'm pleased to inform you that the Los Angeles Business Council, we've released our new magazine-style website where you can find all the information related to our advocacy programs, research, and membership. Check it out at labusinesscouncil.org. A big shout out and thank you to the Sugarman team who worked very closely with the LABC staff to put this together, and take a look. It's very sharp, easily readable, and has a lot of great news on it. And last and most important, I can't say enough about thanking our amazing team at LABC under the leadership of Mary Leslie. A lot of hard work went into putting this program together, as it does every year. They did a phenomenal job of bringing together both the public and the private sector to really talk about the issues that all of us face relative to sustainability and climate change. An important consideration for all of us that love to be in beautiful places with beautiful clean air and looking out to the views that we have, like we have today up on the patio at the Getty Center. So enjoy the summit, have a wonderful day, and thank you for attending.
Here to introduce today's opening keynote, please welcome Craig Overmeyer, Vice President of Operations at Getty Energy.
Good morning, everyone. I'm honored to be here and participating in the LABC Summit. It is truly an honor for us because we've worked closely with the Council. Some of you may know the name Getty, as we were the largest developer of feed-in tariff programs for LADWP and by megawatts, and that largely came about through the help of the LA Business Council in working through some of the challenges that we faced in LA. So they have been a phenomenal assistance to us as a developer of solar projects, but also just a fierce advocate for solar here in LA itself. And we thank them very much for establishing the council and their support for solar. A little bit about Getty Energy. While we've been working on our solar development in LA and across the country, we currently have either developed or are in development of about 6 gigawatts of solar power. And in doing so, one of the things that became apparent was the need to also develop storage along with that to help front-run some of the challenges that were being presented by that much renewable power being put on our current grid system. And as a result, we've been awarded over 210 megawatts of storage projects and 365 megawatts of battery megawatt hours of storage projects, some of those here in Southern California. In order to accelerate that growth, we went out to the private marketplace, though, and solicited a partner financially to assist us and ended up with an investment from the largest infrastructure fund in the UK, who is tremendously committed to seeing development of our battery storage platform in North America. And with that, our mission is to acquire, develop, and operate storage systems in the U.S., predominantly in North America, and in doing so, provide a service. And that service is not only to the public sector, but also to the utilities themselves. Storage systems are solutions for grid and infrastructure challenges, which is what we're going to hear a little bit more about today from our speaker. Our flexibility as a private company allows us a different risk tolerance and allows us to find ways and creative ways to solve some of these problems and do it off balance sheet for the utilities and for the ratepayers. As such, we're able to improve grid reliability during peak demand periods. And more specifically, we are a part of Southern California Edison's current program for 60 megawatt hours of energy storage right here in Southern California. Hecate's storage systems help SCE with their stated goal of becoming the preferred clean energy resources to offset 300 megawatts of increasing customer demand in densely populated metropolitan areas, thereby deferring or eliminating the need to procure new gas-fueled power in the region. It's that kind of partnership that we enjoy with Southern California Edison today. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Carolyn Choi. Carolyn is the Senior Vice President of Corporate Affairs at Southern Cal Edison and Edison International. She has previously held positions as Vice President of Regulatory Affairs and Vice President of Energy and Environmental Policy at Southern California Edison, where she was responsible for the company's regulatory and environmental policy, both statewide and nationally. Prior to joining SCE, Carolyn held several management positions at Progress Energy, leading both their environmental permitting, compliance, and policy. Thanks to her leadership, Southern California Edison has laid out an ambitious blueprint to reduce the state's greenhouse gas emissions by 80% below the 1990 levels by 2050. And as a part of that, by 2030, this plan specifically calls for over 7 million zero-emission vehicles on the California's roads, 80% of all electric generation to be carbon-free, and 1/3 of all space heaters to be powered by electricity. Southern Cal has been a leader in sustainability for years, but since Carolyn joined, they have become the poster child for the future of our energy system, with nearly half of their energy coming from clean sources. They've also become the electric vehicle leaders through their Charge Ready program and aim to have another 48,000 public charging stations installed in the next 4 years. That kind of commitment is also why it is my honor to introduce to you today Carolyn Choi, Senior Vice President of Corporate Affairs for Edison International.
Good morning. With that kind of introduction, I'm going to bring Craig everywhere. Okay, I need to start with just a bit of required business. My comments, while they are intended to remain at a high level and not trigger any Public Utility Commission ex parte notice requirements, it is possible that my conversation today could in fact address substantive issues that relate to matters in rate-setting proceedings before the PUC. So, if you're a decision maker and you decide to listen, please notify me at the end of my comments so that SCE can determine how to appropriately comply with ex parte rules at the CUPC. Thank you. All right, with that, could you roll the video, please? So it used to be when we were talking about climate change, we were talking about an alarming but indeterminate future state. And I think now we see in 19, the effects of climate change are no longer in the indeterminate future. We need to look no further than last 2 wildfire seasons to see proof of that. It never used to be like this. You know, former Governor Brown famously called this state of the climate the new normal before reconsidering his word choice and going with the new abnormal. Governor Newsom spent his first full day in office announcing executive actions to prepare California's emergency preparedness and response in the face of unprecedented wildfires that have been catalyzed by climate change. So this is where we are now. We are out of the proving stage. The video we just watched is a version of a presentation that we used at an annual business briefing earlier this year for SCE leaders. We consider it an operational, not a marketing piece. We need our workforce of 12,000 folks to understand our role in the new abnormal and to be looking at solutions both at work and in the community. While this is a sustainability summit, and I want to talk about the clean energy and electrification initiatives we are undertaking at SCE in partnership with our customers, business and community leaders, and state policymakers, I feel like we should start this morning by discussing how we can mitigate a clear and present danger of wildfire, which is very much related to building a sustainable future. For more than a decade, we've been responding to climate change by looking at cleaning the energy supply in partnership with the state to help it achieve its clean energy goals. It turns out that climate mitigation through clean energy is not enough. We also need to talk about adaptation and resiliency in the face of climate change. We needed to adjust to the new abnormal at the same time as we work to slow it down. As much as moving towards carbon-free energy is requiring partnerships and commitments, approaching adaptation and climate resiliency will also require the same linking of arms. Drought, heat waves, high winds, we're seeing them at an extreme unlike anything we've seen before. And so, for instance, drought is contributing to bark beetle infestation, which is affecting the forest health. And I use the word forest specifically. In a recent interview with LA Times, our CEO, Pedro Pizarro, mentioned that we used to have forest fires in the state. They were contained. Today, we have wildfires that race through neighborhoods that have been built in places that used to be forest. Between 1990 and 2010, California built 1 million homes in the wildland-urban interface, according to the New York Times. And as many as 1.2 million homes will have been built in the highest wildfire risk areas between 2000 and 2050, according to research cited by the Sacramento Bee. So clearly we're not going to unbuild. As a utility, we cannot and would not decline to provide electricity to homes that have been sited, permitted, and constructed in compliance with California codes. If you build in our service territory, we will deliver electricity to you. That is part of our compact. So we need to come together to tackle climate resiliency in other ways. We need to partner to find solutions. There are some forward-thinking macro ways to reduce risks that are going to require regulatory and legislative attention. For instance, we need to acknowledge that areas at risk for wildfire are growing across the state. We need to protect more homes through fire-resistive building codes and by providing incentives to encourage smart development decisions that may discourage building in high-risk areas. We should target how we use resources across the state to reduce risks by recognizing that different regions need different mitigations. And we can focus on projects that target risk reduction for vulnerable communities and areas where the most residents are in danger. In Southern California, where wildlands are dominated by chaparral rather than forests, and where communities in the wildland-urban interface are expanding, we can concentrate efforts near homes. We can provide fuel breaks and treatments so that firefighters have the space and safety they need to defend our communities. Since the consequences of catastrophic wildfires are felt statewide, the state may need to play a more active oversight role in land use planning in high fire risk areas. That starts with providing incentives, support, tools, and resources to encourage land use decisions that result in resilient, sustainable communities. And then we must look at how we can become more resilient in the here and now. And again, partnerships are needed, and SCE is committed to being a willing and committed partner. Some of the things that we're doing, we started to install high-definition cameras in high-risk areas in partnership with UC San Diego and the University of Nevada. 70 have already been installed in areas around Thousand Oaks, Malibu, Corona, and Lake Arrowhead. By the end of this year, we will have 90% of the coverage in our high fire risk areas through 160 cameras. And the cameras can pan, tilt, zoom, and then do 360-degree views every minute. SCE and fire response agencies can control the cameras 24 hours a day, and the output is available to the public so they can actually see what the cameras are seeing. We're also piloting resiliency centers at schools that will include self-generated, solar-powered microgrids. The resiliency centers will be open to community members and will provide power for charging, refrigeration for medication, Wi-Fi, first aid, and if required, can function as evacuation centers. Now, while it isn't always popular with homeowners and communities, Edison has also had to be more aggressive and more comprehensive in our vegetation management to reduce the risk of trees, limbs, palm fronds, and other vegetation coming into contact with energized power lines and igniting a fire. We're also funding some of our most forward-looking thinking partners in nonprofit space, adding $3 million to the $2 million that we contributed in 2018 to support wildfire mitigation, prevention, and resiliency efforts by nonprofits in the community. So, while adaptation and resiliency have become urgent priorities for us, we also must keep our eye on the long-term goals of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. For SCE, that means taking more and more carbon-free and emission-free energy and using that to electrify transportation, buildings, and other sectors of the economy. As the LA Times pointed out, buildings are responsible for 1/4 of California's greenhouse gas emissions. So we believe that efficient electrification can reduce greenhouse gas emissions in homes by up to 60% by 2020 and by up to 90% in 2050 as the grid decarbonizes. Environmental groups like the Sierra Club and the Natural Resources Defense Council agree with us, but we recognize that we still have some work to do with the public who need more education about electric options in their homes, with builders and developers, and with local communities. So yet another area in which we need partners. Last year, we spoke about our efforts in transportation electrification, and I'm here to tell you that we are continuing our many pilot programs, and here again, we're looking for partners. For instance, one of the biggest obstacles to adoption for both personal and commercial vehicles is access to charging. Until we solve that, electric vehicles remain most attractive to buyers who have access to their own charging. By 2025, we would like to see more than 50,000 away from home and multi-unit home charging ports across our service territory. We are currently seeking approval before the California Public Utilities Commission to expand our Charge Ready program to support the installation of 48,000 charge ports for light-duty vehicles over a 4-year period. And so we'll be coming to many of you here in this room to help us site those charging stations in workplaces, in public meeting places, and in multifamily housing units across the service territory. Again, looking for partners. So we were very taken with something that Mayor Garcetti said at Verity Exchange in January. He characterized 3 types of attitudes to the future: future phobic, future passive, and future guiding. And he suggested that his administration would be future guiding. Edison also strives to be future guiding, the utility of clean electricity, to partner with our communities and our stakeholders, including technical, academic, and policy experts. Together, we'll fight climate change while increasing our adaptation and resiliency in the face of changes that have already occurred. As we say in our branding, we're looking for energy for what's ahead. We're looking to you as community and business leaders to help us figure out what else we could be doing together. We're open to your suggestions, and we're your partners in the long haul. So thank you very much.
Please welcome our Creating Climate Resilient Economies panelists and moderator, Pete Holland, West Region Executive of AECOM Design and Consulting Services Americas.
Yeah, that's fine. Well, good morning. Everybody bright and bushy-tailed this morning. We had a great program, and thank you, Carolyn, for your comments. Future guiding, I think that's a good phrase that would characterize this panel here that we have today. I would reference their bios are in the program. Please take a look at that. You'll see how involved they've been in their history in this matter of resiliency in energy. Again, thank LABC for this opportunity, and what I'll do is just kind of start out, and then we'll go with and talk with the panelists and get their views on this subject. So, from a framing perspective, let me start just say that the energy systems are undergoing a tremendous transformation. I think many of us recognize that. It's a transformation driven by the typical forces of cost, density, and demand, and more recent urgent ones of security, resiliency, and robustness. The 20th century system of centralized power, production and transmission and distribution is transitioning to really a decentralized system of clean energy distributed over a digital and more flexible grid with greater customer participation through new business models. System efficiencies will increase, generation sources will further diversify, and importantly, grid resilience and energy security will improve. So, our solutions need to consider the social, economic, and environmental benefits of grid modernization. So this panel today will discuss those technical, regulatory, and political aspects of these potential solutions and drive towards a more reliable and resilient energy grid, a cleaner energy future, and safer communities, and be future guiding. So with that, I'll open up to questions to the panel, and I'll just go down the line, ask each of the panelists a question or two directed at you, and then we'll have a broader group discussion later in the panel session. So let me start with Chris Thompson, Vice President, Local Public Affairs with SoCal Edison. So Chris, some of the wildfires in the state this past few years have been linked to electrical utility infrastructure. What is Edison doing to reduce wildfire risk and build resiliency into its infrastructure as climate models predict increased wildfire risk going forward?
Thanks, Pete, and good morning, everyone. That's a great question. I need to also have a bit of housekeeping before I answer the question, which is to say, before I start, I'd like to state that our decision may also trigger California Public Utilities Commission ex parte notice requirements relating to matters in rate-setting proceedings at the CPUC. If you're a decision maker at the CPUC, in addition to President Picker, who's on stage, please, and you decide to listen, please notify me at the conclusion of this presentation so that Southern California Edison can determine how to appropriately comply with the ex parte rules at the CPUC. It just rolls off the tongue.
Okay.
Yeah. That's how I greet
so
my
with that
family
said,
in the
should
morning.
I repeat the question?
No. I was struck kind of driving up here, what a beautiful morning it is, coming here to the Getty Center. It's a crisp, 55 degrees and a beautiful day. 5 years ago, panels like this and conferences like this, we would have been talking about the worst drought in California history. Now we're talking about a wildfire crisis, and 6 of the 10 most destructive wildfires in our state's history have occurred in the last couple of years. So, the climate is changing right before our eyes. We're witnessing change, and we have to react, and your question goes to that issue. Electric infrastructure is one of the sources of ignitions that have contributed to some of the devastating wildfires that we've seen. But this crisis goes beyond any one industry or any one company. Where we're sitting today, the Getty Center was threatened in December of 2017 by the Skirball fire. Started in a illegal cook fire at a homeless encampment, rapidly spread to about 420 acres and threatened the Skirball Center down the road, the Getty Center. It ended up closing UCLA for a couple of days, the Santa Monica Malibu School District. So you can imagine the devastation and the loss if we had lost this facility. Fortunately, the fire services were able to quickly contain the fire, and this facility has been built in a very resilient way. Not every place is that fortunate or that prepared. You can also see in kind of urbanized, not high fire risk areas, the impacts of wildfires. For a couple of daters who have really taken action, the legislature last year enacted a bill, SB 901, that Chairman Holden had a big hand in writing. And in that process, Southern California Edison was advocating for provisions that were eventually included in the legislation, among other things, to set in place a process to give clear standards for how do you design and operate electric utility infrastructure in a more fire-safe way. And that those provisions are being implemented by the Public Utilities Commission in the form of a wildfire mitigation plan process. So in February, we filed a wildfire mitigation plan that has a number of elements to it. Some of it is building upon actions we were already taking to make the grid more fire safe and resilient. So one thing we're doing is replacing bare wire with what we call covered conductor, insulated wire. As I think Caroline mentioned, things can come in contact with electrical wires and start fires, be it palm fronds, branches, other things. If those wires are covered, then you reduce the fire risk and the ignition risk. So we're doing about 600 miles of covered conductor right away. Those are in flight now, with another about 3,400 miles to come in the coming years. Those are concentrated in the roughly 30% of our service area that is high fire risk area. We're also replacing wood poles with composite poles in those areas in order to make the electrical system more resilient and fire resilient. Caroline mentioned we're also increasing our situational awareness with the 160 high definition fire cameras that are available to fire departments to help them detect and more quickly respond. We have a 24/7 weather center where we have a team of meteorologists who are gathering ever more granular data about the weather conditions around the electrical system so that they can give guidance to our system operators on how they need to make adjustments in order to mitigate fire risk. So we have a plan under the wildfire mitigation plan to deploy 850 local weather sensors so that we have very localized granular data about the weather conditions in Southern California. In addition to that, we're changing some of our operational practices. We are doing more aggressive tree trimming to reduce contact with the electrical system. We are instituting a procedure that we call public safety power shutoff when we have very extreme high fire risk weather, low humidity, high winds, where that meteorological team indicates the winds and the humidity are such that there's extreme fire risk from the electrical system, and our folks on the ground see a serious risk. We will de-energize localized circuits in order to mitigate that fire risk. So there's a whole range of steps that we're taking, both in the immediate term and over the longer term to reduce fire risk.
Mm-hmm. Right. And maybe as a follow-on, I mean, there's quite a few actions you have in play.
Yeah.
Are there more planned for the future that you've evaluated and after you take a look and see how effective these measures are that you're putting into place, are there others that you're considering?
Yeah, we're constantly learning from the improvements that we're making both operationally and design-wise. So we're making some adjustments, for example, to the public safety power shutoff protocols. We took the first actions under that plan last year. We de-energized circuits 3 times in very localized area, and we're learning from that process, how that affects customers, how do we mitigate the risk. As mentioned, we are rolling out some programs to help build localized microgrids so that customers can self-generate in situations where our system is de-energized on a localized basis. And as I mentioned, so we've got about 600 miles of covered conductor. We've got another 3,400 miles to come. We're also modeling where is it appropriate to underground infrastructure as needed. So more to come.
Great, great. So that's SoCal Edison's perspective. What would your advice be coming from SoCal Edison and say, what should we be doing to help prevent these disasters from the perspective of policymakers, ratepayers, and other utilities? So what would your advice be to those three classes?
On the policy front, the state is fully engaged once again in this debate. Governor Newsom has put in place what's referred to as strike team to come up with a number of recommendations around how to mitigate fire risk. The CPUC has multiple proceedings underway. The legislature, under the bill that they enacted last year, established a catastrophic wildfire cost recovery commission that is active right now. They just had a meeting earlier this week in Santa Rosa. They've got one coming up in Oxnard, where they're assessing how do you appropriately allocate financial risk from wildfires. So on the policy front, the state, I think, is extraordinarily active and appropriately so. This is, as I mentioned, not just a utility issue. We meet a lot and partner with fire agencies about how we can better collaborate with them on their suppression and response capabilities. I think the state probably recognizes that it needs some additional aerial firefighting assets and probably more pre-positioned mutual aid equipment, hazardous fuel reduction to address the 130 million dead and dying trees as a result of the droughts that we've had. As far as the private sector goes, all of us as individuals, I think there are a lot of actions we can take to make ourselves more prepared and more resilient. I live in the foothills of Pasadena, which is an extraordinarily high fire risk area, and my neighbor 2 doors up did this do-it-yourself roof sprinkler system that he installed, that if there's a fire, he'll connect his hose to it and turn the hose on and it'll spray down his house. That's my neighbor Aaron. That's kind of he does stuff like that. What would non-Aaron people do? Making sure your eaves are closed is a very simple step. Wildfire embers can travel up to 1 mile on high winds, and they enter the attic eaves of homes and cause a rapid spread of fires and devastation. That's a simple action that we can all take to be more resilient and more prepared.
Super, great. Well, if I could move to Assemblyman Chris Holden, Chair of Utilities and Energy Commission. Speaking of the Wildfire Preparedness and Response Conference Committee that you led and really resulted in the legislation, SB 901. And that, protected ratepayers, protected the electrical utilities, the systems, made them safer, addressed some of the financial liabilities with the wildfire. But then we turned the calendar, 2018. And even more devastating fires here in 2018. And we don't still have similar type protections. What role from your opinion, what role can the state legislature play to restore the confidence in California's energy economy and in the market in order to make this transition to 100% clean energy in the future?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be here with you, and it is certainly a timely question for us to continue to embrace. I think that last year when the legislature convened, we recognized the importance of needing to get ahead of this issue to the extent we could, because we were hearing from all the utilities as it related to exposure and the potential of risk, and the legislature had to start grappling with that. As you pointed out, we concluded the session with 901. 901 also looked at a way to address fires going forward for 2019 into future years, and giving the PUC a little bit of latitude and flexibility to look at cost recovery options through securitization. So we tried to address the broader issues of liability that was put before us last year. As you pointed out, 2018 fire, the Camp Fire, put PG&E in a position where they felt their only choice to address their financial exposure was through bankruptcy. One of the most important actions that the legislature can take to preserve our clean energy goals is to make sure that we have healthy utilities. And when you have one as large as PG&E in bankruptcy and the exposure that our goals are under with the contracts that have been let, that are out there, that have been operating for many years, some of them can be in a position where they could be renegotiated or not implemented on at all. And so what the legislature is trying to do, at least as it relates to the bankruptcy, is to give, through the governor's strike team, some guidance through to the PUC, who is the lead creditor for the state of California. The legislature is, at least we have a resolution that we're working on that would be furthermore to provide support for the victims, to make sure that the ratepayers' rates are stabilized during the bankruptcy, and to make sure that PG&E comes out of this in a way that the contracts, worker protections are in place and these contracts are made whole. Now, having said that, we are equally, if not more, concerned now about the creditworthiness of the other two utilities and investor-owned utilities. And certainly, it's very hard to feel confident that your goals are going to be made. And we have some very aggressive goals: 100% carbon-free grid by 2045. Getting to the 60% is going to be a challenge. Clearly, the 33% was a little bit easier, but by 2030, we have some aggressive goals that we're going to have to meet, and it's the low-hanging fruit, I think, has been picked. And so ensuring that the utilities are stabilized, where they can continue to invest and getting us to our goals is going to be very important. And so I know that we're working very closely with the governor's office. There's a clear need in this session early on to come up with a solution. A lot of folks are talking about a fund that could be established that would be on the front end of any catastrophe or catastrophic fire that might happen going forward this year or in future years, that could be drawn upon so that there's some assurances within the bond rating world that whichever utility might happen to be impacted by a catastrophic fire in their territory, that there's at least relief. Then if it turns out that the utility had negligence, then they may not be able to pull from the fund. So that's sort of the general framework. What a fund, ultimately, how it's structured, that's the devil's in the details. And who is putting the resources into the fund is yet to be determined. But we're hopeful that the strike team will at least give us some sense that we're moving in a direction of a fund as opposed to inverse condemnation or modifying that, which I don't anticipate that would be the direction. So we don't have a lot of options, and right now the fund seems to be the surest way to create stability with the utilities and put them in a strong position, implementing their mitigation plans and keeping us in a place where we can be effective in moving forward, staying on track to achieve our goals.
Well, I know you recently met with the rating agencies. You care to elaborate on maybe what they told you and what their suggestions have been around this wildlife fund and how better to shore this up?
I think they, sometimes when can I be real?
I went a little off script there.
Sorry about that. But Wall Street has a tendency to talk to Wall Street, and the ratepayers seem to get lost in the conversation. And so expectations of how a bureaucracy like the California State Legislature, which has two very independent houses, the Senate and the Assembly, and a governor's office that are going to have to figure this out, to have an expectation that we will have definitively a solution by the start of wildfire season is not realistic. And I think we tried to frame the process to articulate the intense interest in trying to come together and figure this out. And by having, and I'm just going to the short version, the 901 Commission is fully underway. That's a clear example that the legislature is engaged. The governor's strike team, another clear example. And to the extent that we can identify, and I think that we were able to at least get them to the place where they don't necessarily have to see a solution in place, but to see a solution that is viable, that's making its way through the process and through this legislative session, that we will be able to land on something that will have a meaningful impact. So they, for lack of a better way to say it, they need to kind of stand down a little bit, because they're scaring everybody with every headline that they write, with every downgrade that they propose, and they're not giving us enough opportunity. And it's I guess it's designed to put pressure on us to move sooner than later, but I think we're going to move smart, not too fast, but smartly, so that we get to the right solution where we're not regretting our decision later, and being in a position to address the ratepayers and look them in the eye and say that we came up with a solution that everyone has to give on, and it's not going to be based solely on the backs of the ratepayers.
Very good. Related question, some observers have noted that we need to address wildfires more holistically, right? By examining the issues of how we develop and build in these high fire risk areas, how we, attack fire suppression, forest management, these areas. Do you foresee these issues being explored this session in the legislature in confronting these threats more proactively?
I think that we certainly have seen, the governor in his budget came out very quickly and said he was putting another over $100 million into prevention measures and forest management. And so certainly that's an area that we're going to continue to invest in. The budget will probably reflect where you see the greatest amount of investment in energy. There will be other bills that are out there. There's a de-energization bill that we just addressed the other day that is trying to come up with protocols around that approach. As we talk about a fund, we are still kind of vexed by the notion of how do you address those who choose to live in high fire risk areas, and then they have no insurance or they're underinsured, and a lot of reasons why that might be the case. Certainly building standards for those who choose to rebuild and or who are in those fire risk areas that need to make sure that they are creating defensible space around their homes, clearing out eaves. We learned from Paradise that there are embers that were traveling miles and they were sucked inside the house. The fire started inside the homes. And so I think that we think we're going to start looking at and making sure that there's some efforts and resources paid to addressing resiliency. And it's, this is an issue that we're all in on. And it's not just the legislature, it's everyone out here, it's every citizen in the state, and those who live in these areas where the threat is greatest, that they have a role too to play, and to make sure that their property is as protected as possible, and that they have created resiliency to the extent possible. But I do think that local communities are going to have to start looking very seriously. I'm not, there's always the home rule issue, and as a former city council member, we're always concerned about Sacramento telling us how much to do or too much to do. So, but I do think local governments and county governments are going to have to start thinking about how they start, and I know the PUC has a sort of a fire zone area, so there's a expectation that good planning and common sense will kick in, and they'll start to make sure that they're not building in areas that have such high risk associated with them.
It's going to be a busy year, isn't it?
It's going to be a busy year, and with this restructuring, we're going to have to figure out, what a PG&E looks like on the other side. There's a bill that Senator Waso has out there that's looking at the utilities possibly being wires only, and that means that maybe CCAs step into that role. So there are a lot of issues that we're going to have to figure out, provider of last resort, all kinds of things that are going to get triggered by certain decisions. Personally, to the extent that we could take a timeout and just really not have, once we stabilize the utilities, once we ensure that the energy and renewable plans are back on track, just take a timeout and kind of let some of what's happened sort of seep in. I think Sacramento has and members, and rightfully so, have a desire to see more legislation to address a lot of different issues, but I think sometimes we need a cooling off period to let what we've done kind of take hold.
Very good. Yeah. Maybe it's a natural point to step in, Michael Picker, president of the CPUC. Question, President Picker, you've publicly expressed that the CPUC did not want PG&E, or any utility for that matter, to file for bankruptcy. What role can your organization play in helping mitigate the impact of this bankruptcy, and how mitigate that with respect to the ratepayers and in achieving climate and renewable energy targets?
Well, let me step back just a little bit and think some not very comforting thoughts. And so I remind myself that I spent the last 10 years trying to build the technologies here in California that would help us to reduce the impacts of climate change. And I think that I've practiced, and I think many of us practice, just to stay sane and to focus on our tasks, a different kind of climate denial. So to focus on the things we have to do to get greenhouse gas emissions out of the California industries, we have ignored the fact that we have slid into very dramatic effects of climate change. So anything that we do to fix PG&E, which is in some respects being described as one of the first true business victims of climate change, has to be in the context that we are probably not clear as to what the underlying risks are to not just the stability of our utilities, but to other portions of things that we take for granted. So there may not be simple technology fixes to the fire risks. Certainly we have to do everything we can to protect people's lives, but there may not be full solutions in specific technologies or even suites of technologies. Here, I think PG&E, for a variety of reasons, is maybe an outlier, but I have to say that the ferocity of the firestorms that we've seen take what they suffered, what they did, from being the traditional 2-acre fire ignitions due to failure of utility electrical equipment to becoming 200,000-acre fires. That focus on the utilities, I also worry, takes our mind off the fact that electric utilities are only 1 in 10 of electric fires here in California, so that the challenges that we have to face are bigger than that. Still, we need those utilities. They are vehicles we use to invest to meet social goals, to string miles and miles and miles of electric wires to communities that have been building out in wildfire zones far from the cities, because that's where people are moving. That's an artifact of housing policy, not so much electric policy. We actually have laws that require them to serve people when they settle out there. That means that the utilities are fully aware that this is not a pattern that's going to be arrested quickly by any single thing that they can do. I think PG&E made the decision to go into bankruptcy for a variety of different reasons, but probably the preeminent amongst them were that they were facing a lot of very strong suits and claims by trial lawyers and the fire victims they represented, and they didn't see good prospects of being able to settle at a reasonable level that allows them to continue to go out, to borrow money, to build the infrastructure we want to decarbonize transportation, to continue to build the renewables projects that will help to decarbonize the electricity supply, to give clean electric fuels to those electric vehicles. I think that they saw that the weight of demand for them to settle was pretty heavy. In bankruptcy, those claims, those class actions, actually go to the end of the lines. Other creditors, other responsibilities, other statutory tasks that they have come first. So that's in the hands of the judge rather than the superior courts and the appeals courts throughout the state. And it's a federal judge who's used to doing these things. Judge Montali is the same judge who actually handled the previous bankruptcy. We know him well. It also puts the pressure back on the legislature and the new governor to do something that helps to settle the amount of money that they have to put out for these much larger challenges that they're facing. So I think that those were pretty strongly in their minds. They described it in the financial media as a strategic bankruptcy. I think that was part of their strategy. As you go into this, however, and particularly as they talk about the things they're doing, they started to face some cash flow. I'm not sure that we won't see this with other utilities. So our task here is to engage in this laborious, expensive process of bankruptcy. We estimate that almost $1 billion will just be spent on lawyers' fees for all of the different lawyers who are representing the victims, the various creditors, including renewable power contracts with the utility, the many other creditors. There's a difference in terms of how the bondholders look at this versus the way that the equity holders look at it. So this is a sort of a titanic struggle, and between very high-powered, expensive law firms who do these kinds of big bankruptcy workouts. Our job is to protect the ratepayers, to make sure that not all of the costs pass on to customers. And so everybody will take a haircut in this, I assume, but our job is to make sure that the haircut that's the least is that of ratepayers. Our experience in the previous PG&E bankruptcy is that at the end, when people had fought and fought and fought and fought, and finally the utility brought forward their workout plan to the judge, that he set that aside for one that was proposed by the California Public Utilities Commission, simply because the judge knew that any of the ratepayer contributions had to be approved by the California Public Utilities Commission. This is going to be much more complex, but that will be a large part of our role. We do think it's important to have an investable utility to build large amounts of electric transformation infrastructure, to provide that clean electric fuels, to help finance new technologies as they come forward, and to do all the other sundry things that we will expect an electric utility to do. It's not clear to me that at the end of this, PG&E at least, will be buying and selling electricity. There may be a platform to transmit it. They may make other kinds of investments. But at this point, clean renewable electrons are pretty cheap and easy to get. What's really hard to get is a really durable way of getting those electrons to homes. And I fear that all the other solutions to try to do that simply move the point of ignition around. I just remind people that in Hurricane Sandy, undergrounding didn't prove to be an actual solution to reliability. It's easier to repair above ground lines from ice storm damage than to deal with underground lines that have been flooded, where you have to dig up the whole system and replace it to be able to get the electricity on. Parts of Long Island that had undergrounding took as long as 3 months to get back online. Portions of Long Island that had above ground infrastructure were back in service within a week. So technology is not always the perfect solution. You know, you may build microgrids, but as we learned from the experience in the Tubbs fire, which eventually CAL FIRE decided was not due to PG&E's negligence, it was a backyard microgrid that caused the fire. You're just sometimes moving the point of ignition around. Resiliency in this era of extreme fire danger may not be a simple task easily solved by technology. We may be talking about larger questions as to where it's appropriate for people to build homes. What kinds of infrastructure should other ratepayers pay for to serve those folks? These are all far larger questions that are someplace in this discussion of PG&E's bankruptcy.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, in your opinion, this march towards the future of energy, has that been slowed down now with the PG&E bankruptcy?
I think that we need to go faster to actually clean up generation. But in my mind, the task isn't just cleaning up the electric industry. It's actually how do you use those clean electric fuels to take carbon out of buildings. We have a workshop at Los Angeles Clean Energy Incubator with folks who are looking at where can we cost effectively compete with natural gas in buildings and homes. And that we are at that point of inflection, but it's going to take more investment to get that to market scale. How do we get every new home that's being built in California to be built with a geothermal heat pump rather than natural gas service? How do we convince people that backyard pizza ovens with natural gas are probably not as good as a good convection oven? You know, people are going to have to go back to Rachel Ray and get her to redo those recipes. But it works, and it's cost effective. How do we make that transition? It's every bit as difficult, and there are more parties involved than there was when we were just trying to get the electric utilities to feel comfortable in buying variable and intermittent resources like renewables. You think that that's the task. Mm-hmm. That's the task.
And so from the CPUC, what's your role? How do you see your role to encourage, those, entrepreneurs and to develop these new technologies?
We are not really good at innovation. We are the state's second largest taxing agency. We take innovation and we can bring it to scale. And that requires a series of intermediaries. We don't provide services. We're that kind of a financing agency. And then we go out and audit to make sure that people did what they were supposed to do with the money we gave them. So that's really a different function than people traditionally think of from the PUC. But that's where we've been good. What we did with the renewable portfolio standard to bring wind and solar into the fleet of generation and to create a whole cadre of developers who are good at building here in California was to tell the utilities to go out and procure it as part of their portfolio of generation. We said, here's what we think we need to keep the lights on. You go out and do it and make sure that 33% of it, now 60% of it, is going to be from clean, renewable technologies. Get that electric fuel that we need for lighting, for all these other things. That worked. In 2016, the 3 regulated utilities were at roughly 30% of the electricity that they were serving to customers from renewable sources, 4 years in advance of our 2020 goal. Some of them, particularly San Diego Gas and Electric, were in advance of that. They're at 45%. We fully expect that most of them are someplace near that now, probably will be at 50% of the electricity they serve sometime between 2020 and 2022. And if they keep on the same course, they'll be at 60% by 2025. That's success. We don't deal very well with success in California. We try to deny that we've been successful. But the challenge is, again, if we get to 60%, SB 350 actually allows then any load-serving entity, anybody who serves people with electricity, to count their hydro. So the 3 utilities at 60% by 2025 probably are effectively at 80%. So renewables are done. We fixed that. Let's declare success and move on to the real task. Renewable technologies were a tool to get clean electricity. Let's figure out how we use it to drive down carbon in other California industries. Gas used in buildings, homes, for heating and cooking, and in industry counts for about 28% of all the carbon. Transportation counts for 40% and is growing. If we really want to decarbonize California, we need to focus there. The electric industry currently is only about 19% of carbon emissions. So going to zero carbon doesn't get us to our 2030 or our 2050 goals. If you think that we want to reduce the amount of carbon emissions so that we don't have these disastrous effects of the onslaught of climate change, then we're going to have to use the utilities as the vehicles to help finance technologies elsewhere. And that is why it is essential to get utilities out of bankruptcy and to think about what it's going to take in this kind of dynamic, chaotic fire environment to make sure that they decrease their risk, but they also don't slide back into bankruptcy again. And that seems to me to be what I arrive at as I wake up in the middle of the night and think all these uncomfortable thoughts that I've been sharing with you. And Carolyn, I want you to know that I had my fingers in my ears the whole time you were talking. There's no explanation.
Well, maybe before I switch to our private sector panelists, Chris, did you want to respond to what President Picker just challenged, I think, the utilities here?
No, I think he actually put it really well. I think of the utilities as being at the intersection of climate adaptation and climate mitigation. And I would agree, California's policies have been tremendously successful. You look at our progress towards cleaning up the electric power sector, greening the generation mix. We've made huge strides throughout this economy. We are making strides in electrifying transportation. Half of the light-duty electric vehicles in the country are in California. So we have been very successful, and I think we should celebrate that. That we don't want to slow that down. We want to speed it up to address the effects that we're seeing. And the financial stress on the utility industry has the potential to significantly slow that down. And we've seen credit downgrades both in the public and investor-owned utility sector, which is flowing through to large-scale renewables developers. We've seen projects get their credit downgraded. That has the potential to slow this stuff down. As the cost of capital for the utilities increases, that has an impact on ratepayers, as Chairman Holden and President Picker were both saying. We need to look out for ratepayers and ensuring that electricity is an affordable fuel for decarbonizing our economy. But those financial stresses are impacting the ability to invest and keep rates affordable so that we can use that clean electricity to continue to make that progress that we all want to make.
Fantastic. Well, great. Well, Lynn, let me transition to Lynn Jurich, CEO of Sunrun. Lynn, you had one of the largest residential solar and battery companies in the U.S. Founded this not too long ago.
12 years ago.
Yeah, seems to have moved very, very quickly. What role do you believe that these distributed energy resources can play in creating a more resilient community?
Absolutely. I am so thrilled to be here because not only do we need to be future forward, I think it was, but we need to be future fast. I completely agree with President Picker about how we're in denial. We have to go fast. This is unprecedented. And I think we have solutions. So I am really here to share with you guys a solution, make it real for the city of LA so we can get a sense for the type of innovation that's out there that's already affordable that we can take advantage of as we think about how to build the future here. So, as Pete mentioned, I am an entrepreneur. I started this company with a classmate at Stanford Graduate School 12 years ago. And our vision was solar is the technology to build us a distributed, clean system. What's so breakthrough about solar is that you can use existing infrastructure. And so it's going to completely transform our model from something that's centralized, monopoly-based, into a competitive, distributed market, which will be more resilient, which will empower customers, which will deliver a superior electricity service, and which will be ultimately better for the environment and less costly. And so we're really excited to, offer today a proposal for the city of Los Angeles. We are, incredibly impressed with the courage of the mayor and the goal of retiring these gas plants. And so we took it upon ourselves to look at the market and to see how could we replace these gas plants with rooftop solar and batteries. So let me make that, real a bit here for us. We believe that the city can create a virtual power plant of rooftop solar and batteries, and I'll explain what that means in a second. The equivalent to one of these gas plants would be about 75,000 homes. So to put that into context, that's about 10%-ish of homes in the city. So the city of LA right now is about 2.5% of homes have rooftop solar. San Diego is already at 11%. So if we just could take LA to San Diego's levels, we could, and add a battery, and I'll talk about that as well, and add a battery to each one of those homes. It's the equivalent of a peak capacity of a gas power plant. So let's get into the math too, because it's already cost effective to do this. So what so maybe let me take a step back and say, okay, so what are some of the challenges that we're faced with in California and with, electricity? One of the challenges is that we do have a lot of solar during the day. So power is most expensive, and the peak time happens, in the early evenings when the sun goes down and when people come home from work. And so what we've relied on are peaking gas plants that, can turn on to deliver power during that time period. Now that we can add batteries cost effectively with our solar systems, what we can do is have each home store that power in the battery. We can network all of those batteries together with software, and we can respond to the utilities' request that, hey, we need power, and we can dispatch it. And we can do that. When you look at the math, that would be equivalent to if we were to pay about $4,000 to each homeowner to have a battery. And then the homeowner would then pledge to allow the utility to draw that capacity from the battery. That would be cheaper than a traditional gas plant centered in the city. So the math works. And solar is already cheap enough on the rooftop where, with a business model like what Sunrun pioneered, where we sell solar as a service, homeowners don't have to pay anything up front. We just sell the electricity at a rate that's less expensive than the utility, so there's savings for the consumer. Plus, this consumer gets this battery added on so that when the power goes out, they're protected. There's a safe place for their family and their community to come in the event of an emergency. So we thought that we would, talk about how we can do this and if we can plan it together, because as I shared with you with the San Diego example, this is already happening. Consumers already want this. And so one of the things when I hear this conversation that I want to make sure we don't miss is when we think about investing in rebuilding the utilities, when we think about the business models, we need to remember that there is this other infrastructure being built on the grid edge, direct to the customer. And we need those two systems to talk to each other, because otherwise we are in danger of overbuilding the centralized system, overbuilding the resiliency, putting a lot of money in that. At the same time, we're building all these resources because consumers are finding that it's a superior electric service to be able to control their own power on their roof and to be able to store it and have access to a battery. So that is not going to be stopped because the cost curves on that continue to improve, and we've seen the adoption. We've seen fantastic adoption of it from consumers. So our opportunity right now in LA is to let's coordinate those. Let's coordinate those and plan together so we can have a system that balances the centralized with the distributed and uses the distributed assets to create this virtual power plant-like concept. And if we can do that and plan it, what we can also do is be able to place these rooftop solar and batteries in the most attractive areas. So we can help place them in vulnerable communities. Think about some of the advantages where if you need to de-energize lines due to wildfire risk and other things, that people who rely on medical devices and other things can have access to a solar roof and a battery, and their home can work for their community. And so what we can do is plan this and put it in the right areas of the city as well. The other benefits that I think are unappreciated from these local resources is that they offer, getting back to President Picker, I completely agree about we have to change our behavior. I mean, this is a human problem. We need each one of us to electrify our homes, to adopt an electric vehicle. And one of the things you get when you empower customers with their own energy on the roof and their own battery is they get excited about this. This is the way you have a conversation about, electrify the heating. This is the way you have a conversation about electrify the vehicle. It is the anchor product in the home, and it's what's going to actually change the behavior of people, which is ultimately what we need because this is a bigger problem than electricity. So that's a benefit. The other benefit of these local resources is that they create a lot of jobs. So more of the cost in developing this is in jobs versus utility scale type renewables because they're more labor intensive. So it's a massive job creator for the community. Another benefit is, a lot of the challenges with, piping in large scale renewables, first you have to build the transmission infrastructure, and that takes a long time, and there's a lot of fights over that. And again, we can move quickly. We can do this stuff quickly on the roof. We can put this up in a single day. We can put, a rooftop system and a battery. And the local resources also provide other services that we need for power. So, some of the complaints again are, in operating the grid is you need these local power plants to balance the grid to help with some voltage support and other things. And these distributed resources can provide those services as well. So that is our pitch. We've actually launched a paper today, and so you can find it in the materials that are being handed out to make these recommendations to the city. And so we have outlined just 7 of these recommendations, what this could look like. And so again, what we're saying is just to get to where San Diego is, if we coordinate together, we can give all of these homeowners and all of these apartment dwellers and all of these people in the community access to backup power. We can coordinate so we can actually share those resources. and we can do it more cost effectively than traditional sources.
So how do you specifically look to move the customer demand equation?
Yeah, well, one thing is that we almost don't even have to, because this is so wildly popular. So when we go out and we survey our customers, independent of socioeconomic level, political inclination, demographic data, solar is universally attractive. And it's very American in a way. It's this idea of, I want to be in control. I want to be in control. So, it's been fascinating to me to watch that, because as a, environmentalist, I, had always thought the early adopters would be greenies. And that's one of the things that's so powerful here, is that it's not. It's actually really the motivator is, okay, I want control, I want safety for my family, I want to protect, my family. And now when we've been able to add the battery, and the battery's gotten cost effective. So just to put it in context, 2 years ago, we would have never even thought it was realistic to pair a battery with solar. We wouldn't have thought it would be cost effective enough. In 2 or 3 years, I think every system will have a battery on it. It'll be that cost effective. And I would also offer that we've already done this in New England. So in New England, we have competed in the energy auction against traditional fossil resources, and we have won, where we're going to be providing capacity from batteries from 5,000 homes into the broader wholesale market. So this stuff is happening, and people want it. And that's why, at these moments where we're designing our systems and our regulatory framework, we have to plan, we have to coordinate these. I'll give another example, because Hawaii is a perfect example. So in Hawaii, we now have 20-30% of homes-ish have rooftop solar. And so what started happening was the utility grid said, we can't take any more of that exported solar power. So what we started doing was putting batteries on every single home. So we put the batteries on the home. The battery is now storing everything during the day from that solar system, and then the homeowner then draws all the power out of the battery. And we can do that more cost effectively than the utility today. Now, Hawaii has expensive power, but we're going to get there everywhere due to technology cost curve and improvements. But what's happening, just like sharing economy, just like Airbnb and Uber, you want to utilize your resources. So what we're saying is these homeowners want these batteries. They're getting cost effective to pair, but they only really need them when the grid goes down. Now, when the grid goes down, the system can island off. You get to have your power at night with the battery. It recharges during the day with the solar. Makes a ton of sense. But why not utilize that battery with the utility? And so we're still at the very early days of thinking about the right models where there's incentives to do that. So using the Hawaii example, it's like we're this thoroughbred resource, like locked in the house. We have these batteries, they're sitting there. They would add a ton of value to the grid. We just need the utility to want to ask for it. We need the mechanism to do that. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we think is so exciting about this LADWP proposal, is we can do this in coordination. And when we do it in coordination and we really value appropriately what this battery and solar can do, then we can set up this business model where we're able to put it on the disadvantaged communities, where we're able to make it more attractive for people to adopt it. And I'm so optimistic about innovation in my cohort of entrepreneurs who are out here, dedicating our lives to solving this problem quickly. We can do it if we give the right mechanisms for private sector to come in and innovate and push and give homeowners and give people solutions that they want.
Which gets back to the certainty and, talking to the bond and the financing agencies in this equation. Right. They have to see, a more stable environment to be, funding and financing these initiatives going forward.
Well,
So-
I would also add though, we would finance them in the private markets. So my company has financed $4-5 billion of individual rooftop solar systems in the private market. So again, we want compensation for the services that we're going to put to the grid. But the financing can be done privately, and that's how we currently run our business with our 250,000 customers that we have today.
Okay. Well, good. I want to now switch to Chris King, the Chief Policy Officer of Digital Grid for Siemens. And, Siemens is an international leader, Chris, in infrastructure, digitalization, electrification. You have a global remit. So question for us is, what are the best practices you're seeing globally that California can learn from and can utilize as we transition to this 100% renewable goals by 2045?
Thanks, and thanks for having me on this panel. So we do have experience all over the world, and we look for those best practices to bring them to different places depending on where we're starting from and going to. As we go through this energy transformation, we're actually seeing some serious issues develop on some grids in some cases, like HECO, Lynn mentioned, in Hawaii, when you get a high penetration of solar. See the same thing in southern Germany, where we have huge amounts of solar, and you actually get too much solar being produced. Then what do you do with that extra energy, and what does it do to the voltage on the distribution grid? So one of the best practices is getting together all the stakeholders, the key stakeholders, and having them put a strategic roadmap together. Germany had this for their Energiewende, whether, some people don't necessarily agree with how it went, but they knew where they were going. They knew we were going to start with really high subsidies for solar, and then they were going to work their way down and then just let the market take it from there. And I think we have them to thank pretty much for the huge decline in solar panel costs over the years, as well as wind, a place where Siemens is very active and one of the leaders, especially in the offshore wind market. So looking at that roadmap would be the first thing. The second thing is the grid, and you talked about this a little bit, Lynn, modernizing that grid, because we can have all these great microgrids, but they can't stand on their own. We still need the central grid. The utility grid needs to be able to support these, needs to be able to deal with these voltage issues. And what we need is modernizing that. So what that means is adding communications, automation, data collection, sensors, and switching to the ends, so you can bring these resources on. You mentioned the sort of residential homes as microgrids. We've got a big project in Finland, and they had this is actually a non-wires alternative. The transmission grid there was running out of capacity, so they had a huge bottleneck in one area. Turns out the largest shopping center in Finland is there. It's called Salo. Still looking to go do that site visit. But they turned it into a virtual power plant. So it's fully interconnected with the grid. It has rooftop solar. Finland has a lot of solar in summer, not much in winter. It's got battery storage. It's got electric vehicle charging. It's got an automated building management system, so it's highly efficient. And the transmission grid operator, FinGrid, just calls on them when they run into these capacity problem situations. The third thing, and this really gets at the intersection of policy and technology in a very broad way, is open markets and open standards as we deploy this technology. We need these to be able to allow companies like Lynn's to come into the market and to have processes like rapid interconnection. That's become an issue. It's been an issue in a number of these, battery storage, solar, now EV chargers, high-powered EV chargers, having time issues. The market wants to adopt these vehicles even faster, and companies are ready to install these chargers, but it takes a little bit of time to do the planning and do the interconnection. This is not to blame anybody. It's just an area where open standards and standardized processes can really help reduce costs. One of the open standards that I want to mention is in that EV charging space. And Siemens, you may not think of as being a big EV charging provider, but in fact, we have shipped around 150,000 chargers around the world. We operate as an EV service provider. We've got about 5,000 chargers on a network in Europe and building up in the US. And one of the issues there is range anxiety, right? So people buy an EV, they generally think of, and we call it tethering. They think, well, how far can I go away from my home and then come back and have my vehicle charged? And they're not confident in the public charging infrastructure. And one reason for that, there are two reasons. One is they don't know what's out there. But second is those who have experienced it have seen that it is not simple. It's not like going to a gas station, swiping your credit card and buying gas. With the public charging networks, first of all, you have to know who you want to sign up with. You have to do some research. Company ABC, how many chargers do they have, where are they located? I've got to sign up with them. I got to get an RFID card from them, and then I go use their station. Maybe in Death Valley. It turns out there is a website. You can look up the charger, and there is a charger at Furnace Creek. This is a DOE website, but it doesn't say which company provides the charger. So you're going to have to do more research than that just to find that out. So one of the things in the best practice space that a couple of states have done, New York has done this, the Air Resources Board is looking at doing it in California, is requiring a credit card swipe. So you have that confidence, you can go out, you can know that you can, at least if you can find a charger, that you'll be able to charge at that location. So these open standards on the internet, of course, is one of the biggest examples of that.
You know, focusing maybe on the reliability of the grid, you know, how do we maintain and increase that in, you know, with this move towards, as you and Lynn talk about, this distributed generation? You know, how do we, what are you seeing either globally that could be applied here to California to address the reliability issues?
So that builds, of course, on grid modernization, but I would add two things to that. And the first of those is big data and big data analytics, which is a clear concept. The policy issue there is how is the data exchanged? It comes back to open standards. Where does it come from? But there's no doubt that the big data is fundamental as we move in hopefully a rational and orderly fashion to this 100% renewable that we all want to get to. And when we think about that, when we know, President Picker, you were just talking about, we're going to be at 80% by 2030. It's that last 10 or 20%. We know we can get there. New Mexico, Hawaii, Xcel Energy as a utility across 7 states are all committed to 100% and are all pretty much saying the same thing, that we know how to get to 80%. That last 10 or 20% is going to be a little more work. And so the big data will come into that. We don't need new technology to get there, but we need smarter application of technology. So things like transactive energy is one. Smart EV chargers is a key one, because if you put the charging on peak, you're just going to cause problems. Building and heating electrification are other ones that go in there. And again, big data tying those together. So that's one aspect. And then the second one is price signals. And Lynn and I were talking about this in the prep room before. So I said, why are, you know, she said a lot more people in Southern California are putting batteries on than in Northern California. I said, why is that? And it's very simple, that the price differences between peak and off-peak prices are bigger in Southern California, so the payback for the battery is faster. So these price signals and getting them out to customers is a key driver. The pricing and costing is always a key driver in these things. I'll give you an example of one area where tying these things together is critical, and that's the timing of using energy that's produced by these solar resources. So right now we produce too much energy in the spring and the fall and weekday mornings, which people are working, industry is going, but it's still too much energy that we're producing. So we actually curtail that. we actually cut those off the system and throw that energy away. And that turned out last year to be 400,000 megawatt hours, which is kind of an abstract number. But if put it in context, that's enough energy to run 150,000 EVs for the entire year, for free, zero cost energy. But the system has to be interconnected, it has to be modernized, digitalized, to be able to get those price signals to those customers and delivering that energy to those customers. And just kind of a thing I'll throw out there, and the value of this stuff. We see the Model S Teslas drive by, and it's like, yeah, wouldn't I like one of those too? But Siemens doesn't pay that well. But what we can tell ourselves, and we can actually say thank you to that driver, because over the next 10 years, they will be buying energy that they'll be doing it mostly off-peak, and it'll be providing more throughput through the grid. And that adds up, based on the numbers that Siemens has run in with our experts, to over $3,000. So that Tesla is contributing to me and you and everybody else in here $3,000 toward the system, and as long as it stays off-peak, there's almost no additional cost to support that.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. Well, I'll tell you, I could continue on, but I think we are at time, and they will probably come yank us off the stage here momentarily. But I think what we've all heard, we've heard from industry, we've heard from our legislators, our policymakers, our regulators, and one thing I noticed is there's an awful lot of commonality in the perspectives, in the views on what the future looks like. And I think that bodes extremely well for us here in this brave new world, that we say that future of energy, and particularly here in California, which has always been a leader in driving the future. And so it's been a great pleasure to be with all of you and all of you, and I hope we get the opportunity to do this again real soon. So thank you very much. Thank you for this panel.